In the distant future, vampires rule the night, but their numbers are dwindling. One podcast is unlike all the others. Half human, half vampire. This is Lefty Speaks, the official podcast for Vampire Hunter D.
Hello, hunters, and welcome back to Lefty Speaks, the Vampire Hunter D podcast. Today we are diving into Act 1 of Bloodlust. With me are Neal Fischer and Brandon Easton. So, film starts off with Meyerlink kidnapping Charlotte, or at least, we think of it as a kidnapping, as he rolls through town in the middle of the night. All the, crosses and everything just get demolished. Pets slink back away in fear as he rolls through, and the town, the environment, gets a little messed up from it. And I like the fact that in this, if you haven't, the first time you see it, it really does seem like, some vampire lord just kidnapped this innocent girl, especially as you roll into the next scene after it. And I think that plays really well in kind of to set up the expectations. Oh, this is a standard evil vampire story here.
No, absolutely. I mean, the gothic atmosphere. I mean, I was so impressed when I first saw it. I mean, it was just something that we really hadn't seen before in that way. I mean, it really epitomized the gothic horror elements of it, which was not as present in the first film. I mean, it was there, but not so just beautifully orchestrated as in Bloodlust.
Yeah, there was a kind of incredibly dense atmosphere reflected immediately. And for those who I knew who had never seen or heard of Vampire Hunter D, it didn't take much for you to immediately grasp the world. And we're talking about 30 seconds into the film with the crumbling crosses, the speed across the city, the gothic architecture, the smoking environment. So it was like visual shorthand of everything Bram Stoker wishes they could have put on screen. It was just absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, and like crosses everywhere. Like there wasn't a single rooftop that didn't have a cross. I mean, it was just like, okay, this is an aspect of the culture. I mean, just beyond. And at that point, I hadn't read any of the novels yet. So it's very interesting when I first saw it, that I was able to, like you said, was able to grasp the world setting very well from the film.
Getting even deeper into the world setting. The follow-up to this kidnapping is in orbit, and we see essentially, giant space stations giving us an introduction to the world and, a little bit of who D is, of, he's different than all the others of his profession. And I thought it was, for me, an interesting swap, because you have this very frantic feeling to that opening scene. I mean, it's speed, it's violence, it's power, terror, and then all of a sudden it's just, whoop, slow down, musical intro, walk into the wider world and universe of D. And, that, I remember seeing it for the first time. Even now, you feel that just abrupt shift of pace, and you get a little bit of exposition there that clues you in a little bit more of the world. And you find out later in the movie that the whole goal is for them to get to the city of the night, the station in space. So I do like how the movie bridges itself from opening to end. You see it at the beginning, but at the beginning it doesn't tell you that it's going there.
Yeah, that's Agreed, because we start out gothic horror, right? And I mean the poor puppy, that's scared to death, and then we're in outer space, which now it's like, okay, typically gothic horror and science fiction aren't usually in the same movie. So now we've got two really almost conflicting elements in this world setting, and that's really I think a powerful introduction. And again, that's like what, 2 minutes in or less, we're already seeing it.
And then we get the classic for a VHD story, The Quest, and getting hired by the family. And one of the things that I liked about this scene was how it conveyed that despite him being considered the best hunter in the world, everybody was still scared of him. I mean, you're hiring the guy to save your daughter, your sister, but you're so scared of him, you've got a bunch of hired hands pointing guns at him. Like,
in an old chapel. So now we have the spaghetti western aspect added. So it's like now we have 3 complete different genres in one movie. I mean, it was fantastic. As you know, it's definitely worthy of film theory study. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, because it reminds me of the opening of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. You know, when it's like that saying when the head pops into the frame, but you have that mythic backdrop. Same thing when Dee is introduced into this makeshift chapel area. I think the other thing that really stuck out to me is that this is all an introduction to what is essentially a chase movie. Mm-hmm. Like, I can't think of how many horror chase movies there are, because usually chase movies are crime or thriller. I'm trying to think off the top of my head how many gothic horror sci-fi hybrids are actually chase films, at their core, and everything is being set up, especially by that first scene, because now okay, now he's going to have to go get whomever he's going to get, which leads us really, I think, is a great setup to the next scene, which brings in the next group of protagonists.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's also awesome because they basically, and you've got competition, which now the stakes, so not only now have the whole setting, the whole setup, but now the stakes have been risen, and there's a ticking clock, going on. So, yeah.
Yeah, you're the best in the world, but we hired some competition for you. Actually, I do also really like how they introduced the Marcus crew, because Dee is described as the best in the world, the most dangerous. You've shown that people fear him even if they're wanting to hire him. Well, these other hunters, they don't get the same level of being, played up. They're not the Baba Yaga. They're not the boogeyman. They didn't get the John Wick style introduction of 3 men in a bar with a pencil. And they, quite clearly discern that the drunk is not a drunk. Mm-hmm. And they, we have to take this somewhat seriously. There's a whole horde of these lesser vampires coming at us. But, they're not caught flat-footed. They're just, okay, we're going to take care of business. We're going to knock it all out. And they do, and it gets to show that while they've got some amazing skills, they're definitely qualified for the job. Mm-hmm. I don't know about you, but I don't want to try and catch a crossbow bolt out of the air that's coming at me. I'm getting hit. I'm sorry, folks. That's it for me.
Yeah, that was one of the most visually impressive things I'd seen in that year of 2000, with the crossbow bolt arrow flying through the graveyard with the almost. It was just absolute. It was like a wind tunnel of crucifixes and headstones, and then next thing you know, bam, he catches it. His cape flip opens up. It's like one of the most iconic images of 1990s, of early 2000s anime, in my opinion.
I agree.
The moon backdrop.
Yeah. I mean, that's a movie poster and a T-shirt, and a wallpaper on your phone. I mean, that is just absolutely I mean, there are very few. I mean, I think Evangelion had a couple of shots like that. Escaflowne had some shots like that. Cowboy Bebop definitely, especially in episode 5. But that, I mean, I could talk about just that graveyard scene, because it also establishes the fact that, the other bounty hunters also have a level of intelligence and toughness, and you want, if they're going to be people racing against D, they need to be at least partially as competent as he is, and these people are beyond competent. And it was a great opening. It was an absolutely beautiful introduction of the other bounty hunters, and also how they interact with D, with him catching that, letting them know, like, you're not going to, I'm not somebody to be trifled with either. So. All shorthand, but very well done. Yeah,
and all told visually. So, I mean, you didn't, there was very little exposition in there. That was just a very powerful introduction to both of them. But also, I love how D just kind of was like, yep, and then just leaves. He's like, yeah, you're not really a threat to me.
Following that, I find it interesting that the brothers are not so ruffled by it. They're like, yeah, okay, he's legit,
Yeah, we've heard of this guy.
Yeah, and Layla's displaying the that kind of, that hatred, that racism because of her past, and it's like, no, we can't let this stand, and takes off after him by herself. And I find how they quickly portrayed everybody's psychology very early on, that the three brothers are just like, okay, mass violence, we killed a bunch of things. Borgoff's going out just retrieving his bolts and everything else. Yep. He's like, all right, I got to get the ammo back. That stuff's expensive. And they're doing battlefield cleanup casually, and Layla's like, no, we can't let them get away. We have to go after them. Yep. Which, comes back to bite her. And then after that, this is one that I found very interesting, just as kind of a showing how different the world is. Because at that point, we had seen vampires, we had seen, the spaghetti western with humans, seen the space station, the gothic elements. We hadn't yet seen, kind of the wider world, the monstrosities, and the way the world just got all messed up and mishmashed together.
The flora and fauna, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you hear Lefty talking about, yeah, they definitely went through here, but do we want to go through this? There's things in here. Come on, do we really want to go? And Dee's like, yeah, whatever, shut up. They're bouncing through, riding off the back of the giant sand rays that they've got teeth. You're like, you're snack sized, man. Yeah, that's But actually, that scene is one that caught my eye because it's 15 minutes into the film, and here in the storyboard book from Kawajiri, one of the things I thought interesting was the differences between the storyboard and what eventually made what was animated in the movie. They're close, but there are subtle differences. So, for example, here, D is in the background, and what I would assume looks kind of like a futuristic submarine is in the foreground. But if you look at just after the 15-minute mark in the movie, D is in the foreground, and it looks like a, futuristic aircraft, not a submarine that's in the background. So essentially the same scene gets animated, but I find it interesting that from the storyboard to the final animation, you get some subtle differences of, okay, we think this would work a little better. And I've always found those choices as you get further along to be interesting, because you realize, okay, that worked fine in the storyboards on paper, but could this work better this way?
Yeah, that refinement is really interesting, right? Because, well, I'm very envious of you for having that book because but it's really interesting because when you talk about the rays are typically creatures of the ocean. So having, and we also often find bones of aquatic, like whales and giant aquatic beasts in the desert. So my instinct is maybe at first they wanted a submarine there to indicate that where he's traveling across was once a giant ocean, right? But as you said, like a spacecraft or a futuristic vehicle fits better in the theme of the overall movie. So even after the storyboards, they're still refining the story and sharpening it to you're like, oh, this is a way, rather than talking about kind of the background, it's a great way to kind of give some insight into the future part of the movie. So it's brilliant to see that difference, notice those differences.
And I think about it from a world building point of view, because I'm always thinking, like what you said, I realize that's probably the bottom of a sea or an ocean, right? And my question is, like, where are they geographically? I've always wondered that, because you look at it, it looks like Romania, Eastern Europe, somewhere in the Balkans, but then you go a couple of miles and you're in the middle of a desert. Now, I know that, the Sahara Desert is not that close to, like, the Caucasus Mountains. So I don't know. But the point being is that I've always wondered, what actually, because it's something that we've discussed behind the scenes about how do we get from, let's say, 2025 to whatever year that possibly is in the Vampire Hunter D universe. And I've always been thinking about it from, like, the perspective of, like, a quiet place day one. Like, where would we start that story to when vampires rose up out of wherever they were? And then when they meet Barbaroi, they said, we've been around for 5,000 years serving, the nobles or whatever. And I'm like, so what year? Were they around, like, let's say in the background, like around 1800s, therefore, or AD 900, and been hanging around? Or are we 5,000 years from 2025? You know what I mean?
I forgot the exact, we're more like 50,000, 60,000 years or something like that. It's a pretty
AD?
large, yeah. I mean, it's a large,
huge.
Because the vampires
I want to say 1099 AD if I remember right, but my head's exploding apart right now, so I don't trust my memory right now. It's one of the things I find interesting is it's scattered throughout some of the different books talking about the nobles taking on weird terraforming and weather control projects and, creating monsters or human genetic manipulation so that, humans are hardier. The genetic code has been cleaned up a lot so that they make better feed.
Yep. Better cattle.
And it's taken thousands of years for humans to, get some gumption back.
Right.
And I find it interesting, how much you have peppered throughout the books. And I think you get references of that here in the first two movies, but you can't really, dig deep into it. Out of the books, there's always going to be something you like that gets cut. Like, for me, the Frontier Defense Force in the first book didn't make the first movie. Well, okay, that makes sense. You've only got so much time, and you've got to, like, okay, what is my thread that I got to follow? And I think we've all seen plenty of movies where they try to have too many different things put in, and it goes.
Well, that's the wonderful thing about this movie and this exploration, because I think, obviously novels and films are such different mediums that the pacing and how you tell the story, and also being aware of your audience, right? And so knowing that much of the audience hadn't read the novels yet, they had to tell the story in a slightly different way. So, for example, the Barbaroi, in the book are demons. They're demons that were rescued by the grace of Dracula, who felt, felt sorry for them, and then they pledged their loyalty to him, right? But in this movie, they're already introducing so much new. I mean, it's a gothic spaghetti western, horror, sci-fi, right? So that's already a lot for a new audience that may or may not have seen the original, right? So they were, as the distributors and the original producers were thinking, is that, well, this might be the first introduction to D and this world setting that the audience is going to have. So they didn't want, it's like, it's easier to say, okay, these are mutants that have evolved, over thousands of years versus demons. Okay, because we're, as Westerners, we're like, okay, well, demons, we should immediately, they're evil, right? And suddenly you're having more layers that you need to explain, and it's like, okay, no, that one switch from demons to mutants to a Western society where, and like America, X-Men super popular at that time. We had just gone through, X-Men 90, that was super popular. In fact, some of the characters, some of the Marcus brothers kind of resemble some mutants from Marvel Comics, right? And and so it, or reflect some of those abilities. And it's a way for us to, I think, to help create a shorthand for a new audience so that we can embrace this world setting that is so foreign and so different, and really exciting and quite an achievement, to accomplish that.
You run the risk also of, when you have too many characters, you start to lose focus. And I feel like one of the things that I did have some issues with the first time I saw it, even though I loved the character design, some of them, to me at the time, were a little bit goofy looking, and it was hard for me to take some of them seriously at first. Again, like the blood and guts kind of make up for the goofiness at times. And I find it to be very, very tricky to introduce so many different characters. This is what I talk about, early on, about how in the novels, he introduces all these people and imbues them with enough of a baseline characterization that we actually care. In animation, especially something as incredibly expensive as this one was, you don't get a whole lot, because I feel like after you get past the brothers and the initial grouping of characters, you get all these other wild and wacky looking things. And I was just like, all right, I'm kind of trying to keep track. They look so different. I'm able to follow them.
Yeah.
But, I feel like we needed a little bit more, but we didn't have that because we had to keep moving, and that was just because when I went to see it, and I mentioned this earlier, I saw it at the Brattle Theater in Boston, Massachusetts, which is like an art, I think it's still there. It was an art house. And it came out, obviously, in 2000, in the midst of this massive renaissance of high-quality anime. Even that year, we had another vampire anime called Blood, The Last Vampire. At that year, Cowboy Bebop was red hot. Evangelion was still red hot. Cardcaptor Sakura was Digimon and Pokemon were still running through. And I feel like, there were a lot of other properties that were red hot, so that when this dropped, in a very small way, it kind of got lost in the mix. Because we were even talking about the fact that Studio Ghibli had its renaissance in the States. Because this is after Disney had picked up Kiki's Delivery Service and Princess Mononoke Hime, or One Princess, dropping it in theaters, even though it was a bastardized version. There was all this discussion of this like higher quality anime, narrative-wise, not just visually. So I feel like if Bloodlust had been released not in the glut of so many high-quality titles, equally high-quality titles, and some of them were better than Bloodlust, I feel like it may have had a different overall reception, because there was so much going on at the time.
You bring up a really interesting point, because the distribution of the film, they had expected it to have a much broader, a wider release. And because of that, the glut, it had a very limited theatrical release compared to what they had planned for, and then very quickly into home entertainment.
Yep.
So yeah, and that's, I mean, obviously back then, having a huge theatrical release not only made money, but it also created the hype that would carry on to the point where you would have great sales, home entertainment, sales. It was a big marketing ploy as well. And without that, you now have to spend more money on a PR campaign to try and sell the home entertainment that you didn't make money on before. So yeah, it was definitely crippled in a way because of the glut of all the different really high-end, really amazing quality projects.
I mean, we still had Suncoast Video, if you remember that, back in the day where and you had video specialty marketplaces that I feel Mononoke got people to show up. And Kiki's Delivery Service, and even Blood the Last Vampire. And that was when Record of the Lodos War had first gotten released as a box set on DVD.
Wow. Oh, yeah.
I mean, there was a lot of things happening at that time. And I do feel that people did also pick up Bloodlust. They came in to get Ninja Scroll. Somebody said, hey, the guy that did Ninja Scroll did Blood. So it did have its place. I just wish that it had been positioned better in the marketplace at the time, because there had been so many other things. I mean, even I said it earlier, Trigun was just starting to come out.
Yep.
There were so many things that were just bam, bam, bam. We had this just beautiful period that kind of ended around 2002. For various reasons. But, Bloodlust had came out in the middle, had been released in the middle of that. And it was just something that I think impacted how some people reacted to it.
Yeah, and I definitely think that they were originally hoping that it would be a series of feature films rather than just a one-off.
Yeah.
They were really hoping to reboot it and I mean, obviously they had plenty of material to work with all the novels that were already available. Yeah.
You got to be careful with the North American marketplace, period.
Yeah.
Yep. One of the things that I find interesting between then and now is the pickup and large-scale distribution of the novels in English throughout North America, Europe, the Western marketplaces that wasn't there so much before.
Right.
And I think for me, Bloodlust was one of the things that helped push awareness that it was there. I think, with Dark Horse taking it out and all the other properties Dark Horse had, then it made it easier for people to find it. And I think that's one of the biggest problems you have in the marketplace today, is being able to find things. I remember seeing a bit of a history of the Bone graphic novels. And it was independently published for years and years, and he felt like he couldn't get people to take it seriously because it's a comic book, and it's not just for Sunday cartoons or for kids. It's its own medium. It can tell a serious story. And when Scholastic wanted to start their graphic novel imprint and he got contacted, he's like, what are they going to do? Where's it? They're like, we want to put it next to Harry Potter. Well, yeah, that's probably going to work. Because, back then when Harry Potter was clearing out shelves, Barnes & Noble and Borders were in their heyday. And so if you've got something new, all right, there you go. And Bone became a massive seller, and now Scholastic is a massive percentage of the graphic novel market.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a great choice, paid off well for them. And so I think it's kind of that same thing of you've got to be aware of it to find it. And I think, I'm glad that it's something that I got to become aware of through, things that were adjacent interests. And here we are today. Kind of crazy how, that breaks down when we stop to think about it. I find it hilarious that this all came from us just looking at the difference between the storyboard and what made the movie for animation between the two. There's such a difference between writing for live action and writing for animation. And I think part of what exemplifies that for me is that because animation takes so much longer, you have time to really think about and chew on the choices. Because with live action, all right, we got a script, we got some actors, our storyboards are done, let's go. There's no stop and think because of, okay, we've got the storyboards, we have to do our development animation, we've got to get working up to the hero bit. Mm-hmm. So I like that there is that cushion of time in there. Now, the danger is you could just spend it all second guessing yourself, but if you've got a solid team in there, it can give you time to refine, okay, how can we make this fit our overall theme better?
I mean, that's also done on live action, like even on set where you might swap out props and things like that. But again, a lot of that has to do with if you're on the right team, if you're with people that are really trying to have a unified vision of the end product, rather than, we've seen many, movies and shows that where drama can get involved, and then people are trying to tell different stories, and that ends up making the film or series less cohesive. Yeah, when you have the right team and a unified vision, you can really do a lot of wonderful refining. And obviously with animation, you don't have the limitations of real people doing those things. Now, obviously with visual effects and CGI, that's really opened the door. I know, in 2007, 8, 9, 10, 11, we were really trying to think of ways that we could make Vampire Hunter D in live action, and there were just so many there's so many obstacles that either would just throw the budget out of realism, because you got to recoup that money, or you could potentially pose a danger to the actors. So obviously now we can pretty much do anything, almost as easy or easier than anime now. When you're talking about, we can have real time visual effects, in a Unreal Engine.
I remember hearing a commentary on one of the Underworld movies where the full body makeup for one of the characters, they're like, we had some trouble. We had to change our design for what the final look would be a couple times because we found that, to make it work the way it was originally envisioned would be dangerous to the actor's health.
Yep.
So we had to scrap that one. I'm like, let's not,
Like the girl from Goldfinger.
Yeah. The Penguin, just recently, the layers and difficulty and time it takes, there were points where the heat was just too extreme and needed to have special air conditioned kind of air conditioning units blowing on him just to keep him from overheating. Yeah.
Okay, did not know that. Aye.
Thank you for listening to Lefty Speaks, the official Vampire Hunter D podcast, hosted by Brandon Easton, Neal Fischer, and Scott McLean. This podcast is created by Unified Pictures and 9 Realms. Narration by Evallen-Muller. Recording and editing by 9 Realms. Produced by Scott McLean and Ian E. Muller. Based on the works created by Hideyuki Kikuchi. Happy hunting.